New numbers from the Memphis Shelby County Crime Commission show a dramatic increase in major violent crime in the city, up 10% over this time last year.
But if you're a victim of crime, how do you know if you should have been protected by the business or workplace where it happened? Attorney Glenn Vines is here. Good to have you, Glenn.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
So this is, we would maybe expect an apartment complex where we live to be required to provide some security, but does this carry over to other businesses like a store or a bank or any other type?
Yes, Mary Beth. In Tennessee, a business has an obligation to protect its customers from foreseeable criminal acts by third parties. Now, the definition of customer is very broad. It includes not only shoppers, tenants of apartment complexes, it can also include diners, so it's very broad. And one of the questions is, it pops up, is what is foreseeable? What is foreseeable to the business owner?
Right.
And when you look at that issue, one of the questions is, you look at is prior instances of criminal activity.
Okay.
And then you break that further down by looking at the location of the prior criminal activity, the extent of it, and then the nature of that criminal activity.
So, Glenn, with all that information in mind, how do I go about as a citizen to find out if that business, if that establishment has a history like you just mentioned?
Well, one of the ways is to do a records request from the Memphis Police Department.
Okay.
And they all have data that goes back many years on that specific address and the crime that occurred, the type of crime that occurred there, and the nature and extent of it.
Now, is it my responsibility to do that, or do you typically have to get an attorney to do that? How does that typically work?
Most victims of crime get an attorney to do that. Sometimes it can be cost prohibitive for a victim of a crime to get that information.
What if there's a business that itself has not been targeted in the past, but they're in a neighborhood where crime is definitely up, or we've seen a spate of robberies, armed robberies, or whatever? Does that business need to sit up and pay attention and say, okay, this is happening in my area, in my zip code, so I need to make sure I'm going the extra mile?
Exactly. That business owner is really charged with notice.
Okay.
Notice of that it's foreseeable, that the risk of harm to its customers has greatly increased due to the activity in the immediate vicinity of that business owner. And once they've been put on notice, then the question becomes, what are the reasonable steps that business owner must take to protect its customers?
At the same time, though, Glenn, a lot of people will say, is that really fair to that business if it just happens to be in an environment or a location where other crimes have taken place? Is that fair for that business owner to be kind of singled out?
The law says that it places an obligation and a duty on that business owner. And in Tennessee, there were three options. Basically, a prior incident approach, which is a very strict approach. In other words, the first victim of a crime usually doesn't recover, but the later victims do. And then there's the more broad approach, which is called the totality of the circumstance approach. But Tennessee has adopted a middle ground approach to try and balance that exact concern out. Okay. And you know, our firm, we were receiving so many calls from victims of these criminal acts that we decided to open up. Mr. Alex Saharovich and Corey Trotz worked hard to open up a team, establish a team of lawyers that focused on this.
A whole division that worked specifically on that, so you're very familiar with this particular law. Let me ask you about a mall, just as an example, because there's tons of individual businesses. Is the onus on the mall or the individual business, or both?
Usually the onus is on the property manager.
Okay.
Yes. And to be put on notice and to take reasonable steps dependent on the risk that's involved.
Okay. And we're talking civil damages, potentially.
Yes, yes. In other words, compensation for medical bills, the human damages, and that's what we really focus on is recovering, for the victims, recovering the compensation for the harms and losses. But also, it's very important that this practice group, this team of lawyers, is trying to make a difference in Memphis.
So at the same time, though, Glenn, I know you mentioned maybe malls can be responsible, but what about in a downtown area where other businesses are also located there? Maybe the city might own some of those businesses, or an entertainment district. Yeah. Who's responsible then? Does the city, does it become part of the lawsuit, or how does that work?
Well, it's really the property owner. that the business owner, the onus falls upon the property owner to take reasonable steps to protect its customers.
All right,
Certainly
Glenn,
can
thank
get
you very much for being here.
complicated. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.